What do Usain Bolt and Devin Harris have in common? They both set speed-related world records, yet only one of them did it while dribbling a basketball.
You are now the Guinness World Record holder for an NBA player or any basketball player to go baseline to baseline.
Devin Harris came out of college with all the physical gifts to be a star, with a dream combination of size and speed at the point. But he also had to follow up an all-time great at the same position in Dallas. Then finally, years later, he got an opportunity to carve his own path. Except there he was, filling the shoes of another all-time great. And then came stop number 3. And while it wasn't an all-time great, it still had him replacing one of the league's best point guards. And when he finally got out of there, his best years were behind him, but were never properly appreciated due to the comparisons that came between him and the great guards he had to follow up, while injuries also held him back throughout his career. And no, Devin Harris wasn't great, but he was pretty good. And how many people can officially call themselves the fastest man with a basketball?
I wish I was this fast. This is not fair. I truly wish I was this fast. Jock Vaughn, I feel sorry for you.
Let's jog your memory. Devin Harris grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and would be a standout athlete at Wauwatosa East High School, playing basketball and volleyball. But it would be as a senior on the basketball court where he really set himself apart, as he would average 25 points per game and lead the Red Raiders to a 23-1 record, as Harris capped off his senior season by being named first team All-State and Wisconsin's Mr. Basketball, and he would continue his basketball career in Wisconsin, as he would be a Badger come his 02 freshman season. Wisconsin had a new coach in Bo Ryan and a new starter in the backcourt, as Harris would be the only freshman starter on the team, but he didn't look like a freshman, as at 6'3", he gave the Badgers some much-needed size, but at the same time, he was faster than everyone on the court, and Harris's speed and quickness off the dribble allowed him to get to the hoop with consistency and finish as the team's second leading scorer. And on defense, his long wingspan and great recovery time helped him lead the Badgers in both steals and blocks. Wisconsin got out to a rough start, winning just one of their first 5, but they were able to recover as they would improve to 7-6, which included an upset win over a Dwayne Wade-led Marquette team going into conference play. In conference play, they pulled off a couple big wins early in defeating a number 7 ranked Illinois team and a ranked Michigan State team on the road. But after 10 games, they were 5-5 in conference play and 12-11 overall. But then they would beat Ohio State in overtime and would keep winning, as they were on a 5-game win streak going into their final game of the year against Michigan. But they were also 10-5 in conference play, and a win in this game would secure them a share of the Big Ten regular season championship for the first time since 1947. And from the opening tip, Wisconsin just wanted it more, as they would run through Michigan, with Harris scoring 21 points and capping off the win with a slam, as they had clinched a top seed in the upcoming Big Ten tourney, and Harris had hit double figures in 8 of his final 9 games of the season. Unfortunately, their Big Ten tourney would end quickly, as they had a quarterfinal battle with Iowa, which the Hawkeyes would win in the final seconds. But Wisconsin would still get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament and would take on St. John's in round 1. Harris would play well with 14 points and 3 steals, and an all-around performance from the Badgers got them through to the second round. Unfortunately, round 2 brought eventual national champion Maryland, as Harris would have 7 points in a blowout loss, with his freshman season ending with him averaging about 12.5 points, 2 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. Harris would have more weight on his shoulders as a sophomore, after the team lost both Charlie Wills and Trevon Davis to graduation. Yet they would welcome a great freshman wing in Alondo Tucker, and along with Harris, still had senior Kirk Penny. But after losing Davis, Harris had more responsibility as a distributor, as he would tie for the team lead in assists, but would still get his points, as the team's second leading scorer. But he also stepped it up on defense, and no pass was safe with Harris on the floor, as he upped his steals to a career-high 2 per game, which would lead the Big Ten, and Wisconsin's defense as a whole was elite, allowing less than 60 points per game. And after starting the year 3-0, they found themselves nationally ranked, but after a couple losses, they fell out of the top 25. Yet entering conference play, they were 10-2 and on a 4-game win streak, but then they lost their first 2. Yet they would recover, and over their next 13 conference games, they lost just 2 more. And now they found themselves in a similar position to last year, they were set to play the season finale against a 14th ranked Illinois team with the outright regular season Big Ten championship on the line, as both teams entered the game at 11-4. But this game was close and looked to be destined for overtime, with both teams tied at 59 in the final seconds. But then the unthinkable happened. Harris was fouled with less than half a second on the clock and had 2 chances to win the Big Ten. Yet he missed the first. But no problem, he had another chance, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice.
Make sure you block out. It's good!
As the second free throw dropped, and Wisconsin won the Big Ten outright for the first time in over 55 years. Yet the actual Big Ten tournament was again over quickly, as the Badgers lost their quarterfinal game to Ohio State. But once again, they would get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament, where Harris would have an all-around performance in a first-round win over Weber State, finishing with 14 points, 5 assists, and 5 steals. The second round would bring Tulsa, and Harris would go for 12 points and 3 assists in a close comeback win, as Wisconsin was making just their second Sweet 16 appearance in program history to take on Kentucky. And Harris played well, with an efficient 15 points, 4 assists, and 3 steals. But it wasn't enough, as Kentucky won by 6, with Harris's sophomore season ending with him averaging about 12.5 points, 3 assists, and 2 steals per game. The 04 Badgers would go as far as Harris would take them, as on top of Penny graduating, a foot injury would limit Tucker to just 4 games. So Harris would step up in a big way, becoming a college star as a junior, and leading the team in points, assists, and steals, as he would even finish top 3 in the Big Ten in both scoring and assists, and would be named first team All-Conference and Conference Player of the Year, as well as a consensus second team All-American. And Wisconsin as a whole had one of the nation's best defenses once again, as the Badgers would start the season ranked 15th in the nation. But even though they started the year at 11-2, their 2 losses came to unranked opponents. Then in conference play, they would go 12-4, which was good, but wasn't enough for the regular season championship, as they would finish second. But then the Big Ten tournament came, and Wisconsin finally got out of the quarterfinals with a win over Minnesota. Then in the semis, Harris came up clutch against Michigan State, as he poured in 21 points, with 8 of those coming in the final 3 minutes, as the Badgers advanced to the championship game. And Harris saved his best for last, going for 29 points against Illinois, with the Badgers D holding the Illini to 53 points, as they won their first conference tournament title in program history, and Harris was named tournament MVP, while they would also get an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Harris would go for a quiet 11 points, but would dish 6 assists in a first-round win over Richmond. But he played much better in round 2, as he went for a game-high 21 points along with 7 rebounds and 4 assists against Pittsburgh. Yet Wisconsin came up short, as Harris's junior year ended with him averaging about 19.5 points, 4.5 assists, and 2 steals per game. But now Harris had a choice to make: return for his senior season or put his name into the NBA draft.
With the 5th pick in the 2004 NBA draft, the Washington Wizards select Devin Harris from the University of Wisconsin.
So Harris chose the NBA, and it looked like a good decision, seeing as how he went top 5. And while the Wizards drafted him, a trade was already agreed to in principle, so they were essentially making a pick for the Dallas Mavericks. As immediately after, Harris was included as part of a package to Dallas, which also saw them receive Jerry Stackhouse. At the time, Dallas still had Steve Nash on the roster, and hoped he would be back. But when Phoenix made Nash an offer that Dallas refused to match, he was gone. And now the Mavs were in need of both a point guard and someone who could push the pace. And luckily, Harris fit both of those criteria. So while he wasn't Nash, he was still a good fit for a Mavs team led by superstar forward Dirk Nowitzki, another scoring combo guard in Jason Terry, a good two-way forward in Josh Howard, and another Wisconsin alum in Michael Finley. So they were complete, and Harris slotted in as the team's starting point guard to begin the season. But over his first 19 games as a starter, he was having trouble adjusting to the pro game. So head coach Don Nelson started bringing him off the bench. And while his minutes went down, he produced a lot more efficiently over the rest of the season, as his combination of elite speed and control coming off the bench gave the Mavs a guy who could change the pace from fast to faster when he got in the game. And the Mavs were rolling, as with just 18 games left in the season, they were 42-22. But then Nelson stepped down to hand the reins to assistant coach Avery Johnson, as he felt the team had already been responding well to Johnson, and Johnson would immediately give Harris more minutes, as Harris would hit double figures in 3 of his first 5 games under Johnson. And the Mavs went 16-2 after the change, to finish at 58-24 and get a first-round matchup with Houston. Harris wouldn't have a huge role in round 1, coming in as a spark plug in some games, but seeing his minutes fade as the game went on. He had a great showing in game 2, as he recorded 2 steals and a block in the first quarter alone. Yet the Mavs lost to fall behind 0-2, but they were able to dig themselves out of the hole and eventually win the series in 7, leading to a second-round matchup with Phoenix. But Harris was an afterthought in this series, appearing briefly in 2 games of a 6-game series loss to the Suns, as Harris's rookie year had ended with him averaging about 5.5 points, 2 assists, and a steal per game. Harris and the Mavs came back on a mission in 06. Harris continued coming off the bench, but had seen his minutes increase to over 22 a game, and was seeing a lot more offensive opportunity on the second unit, and Johnson would have him play more to his strengths. As a rookie, he spent more time on the perimeter and spotting up, but after attempting 131 threes last year, he took just 21 of them this year, and instead would get a lot of points in transition or beat defenders off the dribble with his first step and underrated crossover, which caught teams off guard, as a Dallas team who had routinely played at one of the league's fastest paces slowed down significantly under Johnson. Additionally, with Harris having the ball in his hands more often, he would also up his assist numbers from last year, as over the first 2/3 of the season, he was one of the best bench players in the league. But then a thigh injury led to Harris appearing in just 4 of the team's final 27 games. Yet although they missed Harris, Dallas was just fine without him, as they tied a then franchise record with 60 wins this season, and entered the playoffs with a first-round matchup with Memphis. Harris would be back for the playoffs, but he would be eased back into the rotation, as he would only get about 13 minutes a night, yet would shoot nearly 54% in the series, as the Mavs would sweep the Grizzlies. But Harris's coming out party came in the conference semis, versus the defending champion San Antonio Spurs. Game 1 was the usual, as Harris came off the bench and took 1 shot, and the Mavs lost by 2, but Johnson made a lineup change in Game 2, as he started Harris at the point, and San Antonio didn't know what hit them. But to be fair, it was probably too fast to see.
He thought that he got him on a wrist. Harris again, and puts it in. Alberto guarding Nowitzki. Harris again off the dribble. Ginobili, perfect pass. Nazem Ahmed couldn't get it. Harris right back to the goal, and he puts it in.
Harris's first game as a starter saw him score 20 points on 7 of 12 shooting without committing a turnover, and San Antonio didn't look prepared for the pace that Harris was playing at, often catching their defense off guard. But Harris wasn't just doing his thing offensively, he also played a big part in holding Tony Parker to just 1 assist and 4 turnovers, as the Mavs won in a blowout. Then Harris came back in Game 3 with 24 points, and would force a clutch turnover in the final seconds, as Dallas went up 2-1. Then after an 18-point, 6-assist performance in Game 4, Dallas took a commanding 3-1 lead, and looked to have found their point guard of the future. But over his next 3, Harris came back down to earth, shooting 31% from the field, and averaging nearly 4 turnovers. And the Spurs pushed it to 7 games, but the Mavs were able to hold on and make a trip to the conference finals, to take on Steve Nash and the Suns. Harris had one of the best games of his career in a Game 1 loss, going for a postseason career-high 30 points on over 70% shooting, along with 5 steals. But he would see his usage drop over the remainder of the series, as with the Suns being without big man Amare Stoudemire, the Mavs leaned on Dirk, with Harris having just 1 more game this series in double-figure scoring, yet still shooting above 58% and helping force Steve Nash to commit over 3 turnovers per game, as the Mavs were able to wrap up the series in 6 to make their first NBA Finals appearance in franchise history. Waiting for them was a team led by an extremely quick, high-scoring guard in the Miami Heat, but Johnson had returned Harris to his bench role for the first 3 games, and while he wasn't scoring a lot, he would give the team more than 3 assists per game in less than 20 minutes a night. Dallas went up 2-0 with convincing wins, but after a close Game 3 loss, Harris was a starter come Game 4, and turned in a solid 11 points. But the Mavs lost again. Then Game 5 would be one of Harris's worst, as he shot 2 for 12 in the Mavs' 3rd straight loss, with the Heat completing the comeback in Game 6 and winning the title, as Harris's second year had seen him average about 10 points, 3 assists, and a steal per game. And although it hadn't ended how they wanted, Harris had shown enough to make him the starter in year 3. So in 07, Harris was in the starting lineup, sharing ball handling duties with Terry, as he would dish a then career-high 3.7 assists per game, which would be second on the team. And defensively, Harris would tie for the team lead in steals. Harris would be a primary starter over his first 48 games and was putting up good numbers, with efficiency that you couldn't be mad at, giving the Mavs good two-way play and being the perfect player to surprise the defense, as they were rarely ready for Harris to take the ball coast to coast for an easy lay or trip to the line. And Dallas was steamrolling the league, but it started horribly, as they began the season 0-4, before winning 12 straight, and then soon after rattling off another 13-game win streak. But after those first 48 games, Johnson would have Harris splitting a lot more time between the bench and the starting lineup, as the Mavs had plenty of scoring in their first unit, but just Jerry Stackhouse off the bench didn't seem like enough. And on top of that, Johnson would say that for as good of a defender as Harris was, he wanted more size on defense. So Harris's final 32 games would see him come off the bench half the time, but his production didn't suffer, and he raised his shooting to above 50%, with the change not affecting Dallas at all, as they went over 2 months without a loss, and overall finished with a league best and franchise record 67 wins, which got them a first-round matchup with Golden State. But this was a run-and-gun Golden State team coached by Don Nelson, so Johnson had to try and counter speed with speed, as Harris would start all series. And it looked like a good decision, as after 2 games, Harris was averaging 17 points on over 52% shooting, along with a steal and a half per game. Yet Golden State had stolen one in Dallas, as the teams were tied at 1. Then over the next 2, Harris put up just 8 points a night and shot below 44%, as the Mavs fell behind 3-1. An efficient 16 points and 7 assists from Harris in Game 5 helped them stave off elimination, but 13 points and 9 assists from Harris in Game 6 didn't do much, as the Mavs were blown out and the Warriors completed the upset, with Harris's season seeing him average about 10 points, 3.5 assists, and a steal per game. Nonetheless, Harris got a big payday during the offseason, signing a 5-year extension worth about $42 million, as he began the year as Dallas' starting point guard and was getting over 30 minutes per game for the first time in his career. And this season he was really looking like a complete player who was hitting his stride in the league. And over his first 39 games he was putting up then career highs in points, assists, and steals, as his scoring had gone up by over 4 points a night, and his then career high 5.3 assists were leading the team. And while Dallas wasn't running through everyone like last season, they were still one of the top teams in the league, as after 43 games, they were 30-13. But Harris's appearance in a January 27th game versus the Nuggets would be his last of the season, at least in a Mavs uniform. Near the trade deadline, the blockbuster deal was announced, as Harris was the key piece in a package sent to New Jersey, which netted the Mavericks star point guard Jason Kidd, as they went all in on the win-now approach, shipping away their most promising young player. But at least now Harris would get out of the shadow of Dirk and Terry. But once he got to New Jersey, the shadows of Vince Carter and Richard Jefferson were still casting over him, and he was the guy replacing a franchise legend. The Nets weren't great when Harris got there, as they were sitting at 25-32 when Harris finally made his debut in late February. But it was clear that he had the green light, as over his final 25 games, he was playing bigger minutes and averaging over 12 shots per game, as he saw a slight increase in his scoring, but a drop in his efficiency. And with high flyers like Jefferson and Carter on the team, it led to some exciting highlights. And it led to Harris averaging a full assist more than he had been in Dallas. But team chemistry was still developing, and the Nets would only win 9 more games after Harris's debut, as they would end the year at 34-48 and miss the playoffs, as Harris's overall season ended with him averaging about 15 points, 6 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. But come the 09 season, Jefferson was gone, and Harris had a full offseason to prepare with his new team, as he would finally break through in year 5. Although they lost Jefferson, they had added something that they hadn't had in a while, which was a scoring presence on the inside in rookie Brook Lopez. But Harris was still the most anticipated player on the roster this season, and in just his 4th game of the year, he dropped a then career-high 38 points on Detroit. Then after sitting out a few games, he dropped 30 points in 3 of his next 4. But he really exploded in a November 30th win over Phoenix, when he dropped a career-high 47 points along with 7 rebounds and 8 assists. But likely his favorite performance of the season came December 19th, when he played his first game against Dallas and torched the Mavs for 41 points along with 13 assists in a win, as this marked one of his 18 double-doubles on the year. So Harris was putting together his best season ever, with career highs across the board. And while his efficiency suffered, that comes with the territory of being a main option on offense, as this season would see him lead the team in scoring, assists, and steals. And midway through the season, he was in Phoenix, as a member of the Eastern Conference All-Star team. And while this was a first for Harris, he did something even more rare leading up to the game. Devin Harris had always been known as one of the fastest players in the league on the break, so it begged the question, how fast could he dribble the length of the court without any defense? And that was put to the test during a practice at All-Star Weekend 2009. And after a couple attempts, the final time came in.
3.93 seconds. That is now the very first Guinness World Record.
As Harris would eventually be recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest man with a basketball, going baseline to baseline in 3.93 seconds. And with Harris also placing second in the skills competition and scoring 6 points in the actual All-Star game, it was safe to say it was a successful weekend. The Nets were hanging around as they went into the break with a 24-29 record, but they had lost 2 straight. Then coming out of the break, they would lose their first 3, and looked to be heading to their 6th straight loss against Philadelphia, as they were down by 2 with the last possession. But then the Harris heave occurred.
Philadelphia by 1. Simmons gets it into Harris. Harris thought he was fouled. Harris scores!
So this got them the win and kicked off a 4-game win streak. But this was the high point of the rest of the year, as they would win just 10 total games post All-Star break to finish with a 34-48 record and miss the playoffs, as Harris's career year ended with him averaging about 21.5 points, 7 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. But while 2009 had been a dream year for Harris, 2010 would be a nightmare for the Nets. The Nets were going complete rebuild as they would ship away Carter during the offseason, leaving Harris and Lopez to carry most of the load in 2010. But after starting the season 0-2, Harris missed the next 10 games with injury. But when he came back, the Nets were still winless, and they continued that trend. And once they hit 0-16, Lawrence Frank was fired. And after losing 2 more, the 0-18 Nets appointed Kiki Vandeweghe as coach. And in his first game at the helm, the Nets got their first win over Charlotte. But starting 0-18 still gave everyone a pretty good idea of how the Nets season would go, as after that first win, they went 3-30 over their next 33. Harris was still one of their top players, as he would be their second leading scorer and top distributor. And even though his assists were down slightly from last year, he was a top 10 passer in the league. But the bigger concern was that he dealt with nagging injuries all year, and his play and explosiveness suffered because of it. And the Nets fans suffered all season, as the team turned in one of the worst records in NBA history at 12-70, with Harris's year ending with him averaging about 17 points, 6.5 assists, and a steal per game. Harris committed to improving his body over the offseason in hopes of avoiding the injuries he dealt with last year, so he would reportedly add 15 pounds of muscle. And the Nets had a new owner in charge, as during the offseason, the league had approved the sale of the team to Russian billionaire Mikhail Prokhorov, and he brought in a new coach, who was a familiar face for Harris in Avery Johnson. But with Johnson came a slower pace, so Harris's strengths weren't maximized. And even though he was getting nearly 32 minutes per game, that seemed low for one of your top players in the prime of his career. But it was business as usual for Harris to begin the season, yet he didn't have a lot of help around him. So with defenses able to focus more on him, coupled with the slower pace, he saw his scoring drop again. Yet his assist numbers were the highest of his career, and most importantly, he was available, as over the team's first 57 games, he had played and started in 54 of them. And while the Nets were doing better than last year, they were still 17-40 at the trade deadline. And for the second time in his career, Harris would be traded for an All-NBA point guard.
And we have breaking news to tell you about. After losing out on the Carmelo Anthony sweepstakes to the New York Knicks, Mikhail Prokhorov and the New Jersey Nets landed an all-star of their own in the form of Utah's Deron Williams.
So Harris and rookie big man Derek Favors were shipped to a Utah Jazz team who had seen their longtime coach resign just days earlier and now had traded away their best player. But they still had a good team led by center Al Jefferson and forward Paul Millsap. And even though Harris didn't seem like he would ever reach star status, he didn't need to, and he gave the Jazz what they would expect out of a good combo guard in his 17 games. But the Jazz collapsed, as they were sitting at 36-33 with 13 games left. But Harris would deal with injury and miss 7 of those, and the Jazz would go 3-10 to end the season, as their 39-43 record wouldn't be enough for a playoff berth, with Harris's year ending with him averaging about 15 points, 7 assists, and a steal per game. After the lockout, Harris would return for a full season with the Jazz, who would get a breakout season from the second-year Gordon Hayward. Harris was again the team's starter, but at this point, his best years were behind him. As well, he hadn't dealt with significant injuries. Going forward, it seemed like he was always suffering from some sort of nagging issue. And this year, it was a calf injury slowing him down. Yet he would only miss 3 games. His usual numbers were down on a slow-paced Jazz team, but he was still leading them in assists and had clearly been putting in work to become more of a three-point threat, as he was taking over 3 per game and making them at a career-high 36.2%. And with him bringing his turnover average down to below 2 per game, he was a point guard that you felt safe with running your offense. And the Jazz featured one of the league's best offenses, as they were top 5 in scoring and caught fire at the right time, ending the season with 5 straight wins to finish at 36-30 and grab the final playoff spot in the West to take on the Spurs. Harris's return to the playoffs didn't start great, as over the first 2 games he was averaging 6 points on a combined 5 of 16 shooting, while also committing 7 total turnovers, as the Jazz lost both. But he came alive in Game 3 with 21 points and 5 assists, yet it came in another losing effort. Then although he had 19 points and 7 assists in Game 4, the Spurs completed the sweep, as Harris's season had ended with him averaging about 11.5 points, 5 assists, and a steal per game. But this was the end of Harris's time in Utah, as an offseason trade saw him sent to the Atlanta Hawks. And on paper, this team was more suited for Harris's playstyle, with guys like Josh Smith who could get out in transition, and another lightning-quick point guard in Jeff Teague, as Harris would both back up Teague and play alongside him this season as more of a combo guard. But the injuries were getting worse, as foot and ankle issues led to Harris appearing in just 58 games while starting 34 of them, and seeing his scoring drop to below double figures for the first time in 8 seasons. But he was still a solid rotation piece when he did play, and was attempting a career-high 4 3-pointers per game, while making over 33% of them. So while he had slowed down, he was still able to do what was asked of him, and help the Hawks win 44 games this season and secure a playoff berth to take on the Indiana Pacers. Harris would start all series, but would struggle, as although he averaged about 11.5 points, he shot below 37%. The Hawks fell behind 0-2, but were able to even the series. But that would be as close as they would get, as the Pacers wrapped it up in 6, with Harris's year in Atlanta seeing him average about 10 points, 3.5 assists, and a steal per game. But the following season would be a reunion for Devin Harris. In early July, it was announced that Harris would be signing a 3-year, $9 million deal with Dallas. But that changed after a physical revealed that he would need toe surgery. So instead, he would sign a 1-year deal worth about $1.3 million to return to an aging Mavericks team who were still led by Dirk and featured one of Harris's former Nets teammates in Vince Carter. But Harris didn't take the court with them until January 18th, after missing the team's first 41 games. But he immediately became an important piece of the rotation, getting over 20 minutes per game as a primary backup. Harris joined a 24-17 Mavs team and helped them essentially replicate this record over the second half of the year, as they went 25-16 the rest of the way to finish at 49-33, which would get them a first-round matchup with San Antonio. And Harris came out in Game 1 and dropped 19 points along with 5 assists off the bench, as the Mavs lost a close one. Then he came back with 18 and 5 on 7 of 9 shooting in Game 2, as Dallas evened it. His shot stopped falling for a while after this, as the next 4 games saw him hit double figures once and shoot below 33%, but it was anyone's series going into Game 7, as Harris came back to life with an efficient 17 points, while hitting all 3 of his shots from beyond the arc, but it came in a blowout, as the Spurs knocked off the Mavs, with Harris's year seeing him average about 8 points, 4.5 assists, and half a steal per game. Harris's ability to stay healthy after returning from injury last year landed him an even better long-term deal this summer, as he signed for 4 more years. And while he was once one of the league's most promising young players, he would now settle into a role as a respectable backup for a team who had a couple different starting point guards this year in Jameer Nelson and Rajon Rondo. But the most consistent point guard presence was Harris, as he would appear in 76 games this season, his highest total since his first stint in Dallas, acting as a backup point guard, but also possessing the size and skill to provide relief for Monte Ellis at shooting guard. Harris would kick off the season with 4 straight games in double figures and would drop at least 20 in 3 games this season, as the Mavs continue to remain competitive, with the team recording their first 50-win season since their championship-winning year, as their 50-32 record would get them a first-round matchup with Houston. But Harris wouldn't recreate last year's playoff performance, as he would appear in 4 of the 5 games and would average just 6 points on below 35% shooting, as he missed all 11 of his 3-point attempts in a first-round loss, with Harris's season ending with him averaging about 9 points, 3 assists, and a steal per game. Harris remained a backup in 2016 and was ironically backing up a player he was once traded for, as the Mavs had brought in Deron Williams over the offseason. Dirk continued to defy time and put together another good year, but there was now another veteran backup point guard who was stealing the show, as JJ Barea would have one of the best years of his career, with Harris's ability to play both backcourt positions being a reason why he was still getting good minutes, as he'd often play alongside Barea, so he wouldn't be doing as much passing, but he still had speed in transition and quickness to make cuts, leading to high percentage looks, as his 44.7% shooting was his highest since 2008. But in late January, Harris was sidelined for a few weeks after injuring the same toe that he had surgery on a few years earlier, but he would still play in a solid 64 games this season for a Mavs team who finished at 42-40, which was enough for a first-round matchup with OKC. Harris gave the Mavs good, efficient minutes throughout the series, as he shot 50% from the field and averaged nearly 8 points. But the Thunder just had way more firepower than Dallas could handle, as they would make quick work of the Mavs in a 5-game series win, with Harris's year ending with him averaging about 7.5 points, 2 assists, and a steal per game. Prior to the 2017 season, it was announced that Harris would miss the first few weeks of the year, as he was again dealing with toe issues, and he would later reveal that his toe hadn't been 100% for years, which was a testament to Harris's toughness, that he had played through it all this time, especially being a player that utilized quick movement and change of direction so often. So Harris missed the team's first 17 games, and when he came back, his role had been reduced, as the Mavs had a lot of guards on the depth chart. But a positive was that Harris didn't miss a single game after returning. However, Dirk missed 28 games of his own this year, and without him, Dallas struggled, as they would finish the year with a 33-49 record and miss the playoffs, as Harris's year had seen him average about 6.5 points, 2 assists, and half a steal per game. Harris would begin the 2018 season with Dallas and was putting up improved numbers from last year, as even at 34 years old, he continued to be a reliable scorer off the bench, with that becoming more of his main responsibility, as he spent more time at the 2 in his later years. And he was relatively healthy, playing in 44 of the team's first 55 games. But then in early February, he was included in a 3-team deal, which saw him end up in Denver. So Harris would join a young Nuggets team with an up-and-coming Nikola Jokic for the remainder of the season. And in Denver, he would get an increased role as a backup point guard, putting up similar numbers to what he had done in Dallas. And Denver was a better team, as they would finish the season at 46-36. Yet in a competitive Western Conference, this wasn't enough for the playoffs, as Harris finished the year with averages of about 8.5 points, 2 assists, and half a steal per game. But now Harris was again a free agent, and I'm sure you can guess where he was going. In early August, Harris again signed with the Dallas Mavericks, as they now featured a rookie Luka Doncic as their future, with Dirk playing his farewell season. Harris missed some time at the beginning of the year with a hamstring injury, but overall played in 68 games and continued to occupy an important role on the team. But the Mavs weren't what they used to be, as they missed the playoffs with a 33-49 record. But Harris ended his year as a starter, as he would start their final 2 games. And overall for the season, Harris averaged about 6.5 points, 2 assists, and half a steal per game. But it turned out that Dirk's farewell season was also Harris's, as this marked the end of his NBA career. But after a few years away from the Mavs organization, he was back once again, this time as a commentator, as it seems that Devin Harris is a Mav for life. Devin Harris had so much potential, but never seemed to get quite the opportunity he needed. His great junior season at Wisconsin really propelled him into much higher expectations. And even though he had time to grow into those on a great Mavericks team, he also had to follow Steve Nash, and never seemed to have the full support of Avery Johnson. Then when he got a fresh start, he not only had to fill the shoes of another all-time great, he had to learn how to be the franchise guy on the fly in New Jersey. And right when things were looking up, the injuries really started coming. Then once again, he had to follow one of the league's top point guards in Utah. So Devin Harris may or may not have had the potential to be a star, but the injuries held him back, and having to follow up so many great point guards only made his contributions look worse in comparison. But Devin Harris's brief prime made it seem like he would enter into the upper echelon of point guards, or at least scoring guards. And even though that's not how it played out, he always had a role on a team. And he wasn't just Devin Harris, he was Devin Harris, fastest man with a basketball. But that's it for today's episode on Devin Harris. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Mavs teammates, or this one on a guy he played with in Utah. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.